Hey, lock is a lock.
Hey guys, it's Midnight Philosopher and welcome to my guide on how to gut and reassemble a basic pin tumbler lock, although many of these concepts also apply to other locks as well. Firstly, let's go over what tools I recommend. I highly recommend pinning tweezers, although you can get away with not using them. I also recommend plug followers. Again, you can get away with using the plug itself as a follower, for example. Or some household items such as a battery or a pen cap if it fits the right way. I recommend a shim, and I also recommend some tool for prying off the tailpiece, whether it's, I like to use a tension wrench or there's actual tools designed for it, or a screwdriver depending on what kind of tailpiece you have. So in many cases you'll find tailpieces like this, just with two little screws that need to be unscrewed, and then that back part comes right off. Other times you will find tail pieces like this, just a screw cap that you can actually just unscrew if you push down on this little pin right here that's holding it into place. Now the cap comes loose, and when you let go of that pin, it locks it into place. Right, let's put that aside here. Also, often you will find these clips, these little C-clips that fit into little grooves in the plug and rest on the edge of the housing, and it prevents the plug from sliding out. And less commonly, you will find these like super thick clips right here that they require a lot more prying force in order to bend them out. And if you want to see me trying to do that, you can see me doing that in my ASA 700 video or in my part 2 of my Medico guide. Now, let's go over if you have a key. Very simple. Once you've picked the lock, you want to make sure always try to keep everything in frame, and you want, if you have a key, just lock it back up. Avoids mistakes for later on, and it'll make things easier moving forward. So let's just leave that here for now. If you don't have a key, let's say, what you can do is this. The first step for gutting in this case is to just go straight away to step 2, which is to remove the tailpiece. And how do we remove the tailpiece when we don't have a key? Alright, so if you don't have a key, there's a major problem with the tailpiece is when you actually try to move this C-clip, it will rotate the plug. And a lot of times when you're trying to fumble around with it, you can end up slipping it back locked, or you can actually lock it upside down, which we'll go over in a second. But what you can do to avoid this is put pressure onto the plug itself as you're trying to pry this off. So block one side of the C-clip with your finger so it doesn't slide past. Then the other side you can try to pry and pull until it starts to open up a little bit. Once it opens up a little bit, you can actually try to get your tool in there a little bit more and then pry it off a little bit more. So you might need to go a little bit further. Right there, and then it'll come off. I'm gonna actually put it back on just to show you. Sometimes you can also get away with rotating the C-clip until it pops into the little groove in the bottom here, like that. And at that point, it becomes much easier to just try to press it off from the edge here just by doing that. Just the groove itself acts as a little ramp over there to push against. Now, I'm just going to show what happens if when you're doing that, you accidentally lock it. If you lock it back locked again, then you're just gonna have to repick it. But if you lock it upside down, be careful if there's holes here, because your key pins can fall out of that. So I'm just gonna hold it this way. And let's say your key pins did fall out of that. Now, what you can do, if you don't have the key, just save your key pins for later. And just be careful not to rotate this back locked so that the driver pins don't fall into those key slots. But if you do have the key, you can literally just insert the key at this point because there's nothing stopping those pins from coming up. The key will be able to insert whatever pins are left. And you can put the pins in through these little holes and try to match them up to the shear line. That's just one option. Another option, what you can do is if you have a pick, just use the back of your pick, slide it in until it's all the way through. And before I rotate it, I'm just going to note, I'm going to try to rotate it with this tail piece towards the bottom where the protruding end is on the side of the Bible, which I'll explain in a second. So I use my pick, I push down on all of those driver pins, and now I try to rotate. Sometimes it takes a little bit of fidgeting, and then there you go, back to a saved position. Now, why did I rotate it this way? Now that way it prevents there from being a giant gap. When I take my follower and I'm ready to actually gut this lock, always make sure that the key pins are pointing upwards before you go through so you don't drop them out. Now I don't leave a giant gap. Like if you look on the bottom, there's a giant gap there. I don't want that gap to be on the top. Till we go all the way through, and then we've just removed and separated, made everything much easier. Now, another option, let's just leave this here for a second to the side and go over this guy over here. Just going to clear the space. With this guy, first of all, I'll remove the tail piece. So if you have the key, lock it back up, take the key out, or you don't even need the key to lock it back up. Just don't do this with the key in because then the plug can rotate. So now you can actually just pry that tail piece off without worrying about anything. All right, so now let's say that we are in the position where I'll just show here how the key pins can actually pop up from the bottom here, like that, and that allows the key from coming out. Just gonna push that down so it doesn't block us. So now, let's say we're at the point where all those pins, or all the gap right here is on the wrong side. So you can try to rotate it around, or you can also use a shim. And in general, whenever you're gutting a lock that you're not familiar about or might have extra holes, you can just use a shim, put that there, and now that will bridge that gap and protect you from dropping your driver pins into that little gap as you try to gut. So again, make sure that the key pins are pointing upwards, and we can just go right through and no mishaps thanks to the shim. So that's why shims are very useful. Okay, let's go into the next stage of gutting. So remove that shim, put this to the side. Let's work on the moving parts first, the loose parts, which are these key pins. So what you want to do is just use your thumb to block all the pins, drop out one pin at a time. 6, use your pinning tweezers, put it in slot 6, or you can do this the other way around too. I just like to do it this way because when I get to 1, it's hard to kind of hold it. I don't know. There's not really a good excuse there. Everybody has their own way of doing it. So there's 4, 3, 2, oh, that was 1. And actually, I'm going to go over in a second here. What do we do if they all get jumbled up? So let's just put them all over here. Forget the order. Okay? Oops, I dropped them all. I don't know what the order is anymore. Let's say. So we'll get to that in a second, but let's get these driver pins out. Let's show that. So when I'm removing the driver pins, if I don't have pinning tweezers, again, I can just use a pick as I'm pushing through and then just try to block that pin with my pick to prevent it from flying up. Right there. And then once I get the follower out enough, then I can just lift my pick up and it won't go flying into outer space. It might spring up a little bit, but you'll be able to control that a lot more easily. All right, once you have that out, you can just, especially if you don't have pinning tweezers, if you have pinning tweezers, just go in there and grab them. If you don't, just turn it upside down. Make sure you don't mix them with your key pins. The driver pins have flat ends, so they're pretty easy to identify from the key pins. All right, so now we're just going to go through one by one and pop them out. And at this point, once I've removed 3, most of the time these locks are either 5 or 6 pins. So once I've removed 3, dump out these springs. And I will now switch my follower to the other side, unless I have a follower like this that has a groove in here and prevents gutting from the other side and makes it much more difficult. So in this situation, this follower can be used on both sides to gut. So I'll continue everything from the reverse side now. So now that was number 6, number 5, and number 4. And then I just can turn this upside down, drop out those springs, and I'm now ready to figure out what to do about these key pins. So let's get the key in here. This is the trick for putting the pins in. So just get your key in. If you don't have a key, then it really doesn't matter what the order is. You can put whatever order you want. But if you want the key to work, then just put in a key pin. Okay, that one is, oops, dropped it out. That one was too high, so I'll put it back to show. If you look carefully, it's slightly protruding from the shear line, so that means it's not the right one. We put it in there, it's not the right one. Okay, let's go into the next one. Still too high. Keep going. And if you don't have pinning tweezers, it just makes this process much longer because you have to work with your fingers. But when you have pinning tweezers, it makes things faster. Okay, so I think we got lucky and this was the very last one. There you go. Now it matches up with the shear line perfectly. So now I'll just quickly go through them here to demonstrate how I do that. Okay, wrong one. As you go through them, it will become easier to identify them and it will be faster for every one. And you can also look at the key ahead of time, but I just find just going trial and error very quickly is the fastest way to do it. Sometimes you can remember which slots are higher up than other slots. Oh, that one is too low. So just drop out pin 1. Put it there, and last one, put it right there. Okay, so I'm not going to dump them all out again, but when you are doing your gutting videos, always remember keep everything in frame and put your key pins in line with your driver pins and then show a close-up of your pins so that way they're clearly visible to the viewer. All right, so I'll just leave that here for now and we will go over reassembly. Now, when you're reassembling, you got to note which side is the front and which side is the back. Often it's not clear. So if you don't know, there are ways to check, but the best way is to mark it right from the beginning. So if you don't know, like for example, with my American 1100, I'll just show here. If you look at that body, there's a very slight difference between the front and the back. The front has a little cutout there, a little groove for that front piece to sit into, and the back doesn't have that. Sometimes there won't even be a noticeable difference. And in that case, you just have to sometimes try and figure out which side is the right side. But the best way is to just note it ahead of time. So you can put a little mark on the front with a little pen or something, so that way you know which side is the front. Now let's go back to reassembly. So once you're ready to reassemble, the way that I recommend doing it is with your follower, same way that we did it in reverse. Just expose 3 pins or 3 slots, I should say, and put your springs in one by one. Now I'm just going to show quickly, if you don't have a plug follower, you can just use your plug itself, although this is much riskier and it prevents you from doing 3 pins at a time. You have to do all of them at once, and it makes life very difficult. So this is why I recommend a plug follower, because in cases like with this lock, the springs actually stick up out of the slots here. In cases where the springs don't stick out of the slots, makes gutting easier, but when they stick out of the slot like that, the pins can't balance properly. So what you need to do in that case is just either a lot of finesse with a pick in your plug, or get the proper tools, use a plug follower, and do it piece by piece. So I'll show how I deal with these protruding springs here. So I put my spring from slot 3, and I take my pin from slot 3, and I put it on top of that spring, and I push my follower into the pin so it locks it into position. Now I don't need to worry about it springing out of place. Now I can put my tweezers on top of the pin and release tension on my follower to allow that pin to go back down. And then I can slide my follower over top. Now I'm ready for the next one. I'll do this quickly here. Number 2. Just like that. Number 1 is a standard pin, so it's even, I don't even need to release tension. I can just hold tension and push it down. I'll show that here in a second. But because it's a standard pin, it doesn't catch in the spool, so you need to push a little bit harder to lock it into position. But once it's locked into position, then you can just slide it down, just like you're picking the lock itself. And then your follower goes through. Then you switch sides, expose 3 slots. Make sure that you don't go too far, because then that other pin will come flying out. Expose 3 slots, and make sure that you're maintaining the correct order of all your pins. There's 4, then 5. Okay, I'll grab it from the top of the spool. I find when I'm grabbing from the center of the spool, I don't have enough leverage to actually push down on it. So when I grab from the top of the spool, it gives me more space to actually push it into that slot, and then to push my follower onto it. Just like that. Oh, it's coming out. Just gotta maintain pressure, loosen, then over top. Just like that. Okay, last one. Number 6. Put this guy over top. Oh, come on. Grab by the top of the spool. And then I can just put him on top of that spring. Of course, the last one wants to be the hardest one. But it's also right because it's by the edge here. Okay, there we go. Push it in. Better grip on my tweezers. Always make sure you have a good grip on everything. That's the key to being able to do this kind of fine work. Now, noting that this is the front right here, I don't want to lose track of that. I'm going to get my plug. I'm going to confirm, before I lock it up, I'm going to confirm that the key is correct. Okay, everything looks right there. And then when I put it in, I can avoid using a shim by putting it in with this protruding side facing up. So that's what I will do, just like this. Now we are back together, and lock it back up. We can put our C-clip on. Sometimes there are special notches, like on this lock, there's a little notch in the top of the plug for this little notch on the top of that C-clip. I'll show that a little more clearly to fit into. If you see right there, there's a little cutout, little hole for that C-clip. So sometimes it's designed to fit in a very specific way. So just note that when you're trying to get it together. See, it's a little bit off from that hole, so I just need to rotate it slightly. It should clip into place. Get a better angle here to push it. If the C-clip isn't on properly, it won't often even be able to fit into the housing properly or something. There we go. Now it's locked into place. You can see it's flush. Everything now it won't get blocked when I try to put it into the lock body or wherever it needs to fit. I'm going to test the key once again just to confirm I reassembled it properly. Everything is good. And now we're good to actually reinsert it into the lock, screw everything back up. But before you actually screw it, you want to, again, anytime you have these locks, you can take the screw out so it doesn't block the space. Lock it, make sure that everything is working. And let's say it wasn't working. Okay, well then at least I didn't lock it. I can take this out and I can try to salvage things. Otherwise it would be a lot harder to do that. But now confirm that it does work. So now put the screw in and screw it back up nice and tight. And we are good to go. All right, now quickly, I just want to note one extra thing. If you have a piece, something like this, you can also use this end to remove these kind of tail pieces. They are designed to, let me get the focus a bit better. They're designed to fit into those grooves and then press that pin down while unscrewing that back piece there. But again, when the key is in, it makes things harder. So let's take that out for a second. The focus good, and then you can remove that. Now let's say you tighten it up. I tightened it up nice and tight. I'm going to use my key now. I can barely even get my key in there. Okay, now when I try to turn it, it's so tight, it's barely turning. So the reason is because I put that tailpiece on way too tight. And what I need to do is I need to loosen it. Now let's say I loosen it a little too much. Now often it'll make it so loose that you can't even pull the key out because it's too loose, and it misaligns the slots on the key pins with the slots in the driver pin. So what you need to do is find that perfect balance. Tighten it up all the way, then release it just like a notch or two. Then at that point the key will operate smoothly and you'll be able to remove it. All right, that's my guide on how to gut and reassemble a lock. Hopefully that helps some other pickers out there. If you have any questions or experience any gutting disasters, feel free to leave a comment below and ask me, and I'll try my best to help you out. All right, take care.